Hi guys, hello, welcome to my channel. We've got quite the video today. About a year ago, I did a video where I showed you guys every single book that I have on my physical TBR, and I think at the time it was at about 60. Well, as of right now, I think I've like doubled what I had in that last video. And today I'm gonna go through every single one of them with you again. Hi guys, so I've been editing this video for the past couple of days and I realized I forgot a couple of books, so I just want to kind of like quickly go over those really fast. The first one is Leigh Bardugo's The Familiar. This is her newest release, and I only have the dust jacket right now because Kevin is reading it currently and he's really enjoying it. But yeah, I still need to read it, so there's the first one. And then the other two that I have are both from a series, the Brutal Birthrights series. We have the last two, basically. There's Broken Vows and Bloody Heart. So those are the three books that I forgot to mention. Let's get back into the video. Because I have like so many books and I want this to have some sort of structure to it, I did organize all the books in genre order. So we're gonna go through them per genre, and we're gonna kick this off with the sci-fi genre, which is one that I don't really have a whole lot of books from, so I figured it'd be easy peasy to kind of start us off with. Literally, this little stack right here is all of the sci-fi books that we own, and 3 of the 4 are from one singular series. Basically, these are books 4, 5, and 6 in the Red Rising series. I don't actually know what order they're supposed to be in. I think it's this order or this order? I don't know. I have already read the first 3 books in the Red Rising series. I absolutely love them, but I am taking a little bit of breather because these are some chunky books. And then the only other sci-fi book that I have is actually a recent purchase. I literally just hauled this. This is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. It's basically about a guy stuck in space and he's got like amnesia and doesn't remember why he's in space or something like that. It sounds very intriguing. Now let's move on to our next genre, which is our biggest genre. We're going from kind of smallest to biggest, and that is the fantasy genre. And within that genre, we do have a couple of like subgenres, and the first one that we have is cozy fantasy. I don't read cozy fantasy super often, but I definitely enjoy the occasional book or two every year. Specifically like fall and winter is when I typically am in the mood for them. And I actually just remembered I have a couple more up here. And we'll go ahead and start off with those ones. I don't remember what the series is called, but the first book is Half a Soul, and the second and third book is Long Shadow and 10,000 Stitches, and these are all from Olivia Atwater. These are all just like super cutesy, cozy fantasy romances set in Regency, England. I read Half a Soul last Christmas, and I definitely feel like I'll probably end up reading these around that same time because it was just like the perfect timing, I feel like, for those books. And then the next book that I have is also a book, the second book in a series. This is Emily Wilde's Map of the Other Lands. I read the first book in this series not last winter, but the winter before that. And I feel like this one is, again, another one that I'm probably gonna pick up in the fall. I originally was gonna try to read it this past spring, but clearly that did not happen. Okay, I brightened up the camera a little bit because I feel like it was getting really dark. The next one that we have is The Thorns Remain by J.J.A. Harwood. This one takes place in 1919. And it's basically about a group of friends who get stolen by the Fae, and the one friend that like remains has to like find them and yada yada yada. It sounds really cute. The cover looks very Christmassy to me, like winter season-y, so again, winter vibes. And then the next 2 books that we have are more books in a series, and I don't actually know if these ones are cozy fantasy, but they have kind of similar vibes to me as Legends and Lattes. Like reading the synopsis, I get kind of the same vibe. We have The Ruthless Lady's Guide to Wizardry and then Unnatural Magic, and these are both by C.M. Wagoner. Speaking of Legends and Lattes, we have Bookshops and Bone Dust, and these books are by Travis Baldree. I'm pretty sure Legends and Lattes was like one of my first cozy fantasies, and it wasn't like my most favorite book in the world, but it was definitely really cute. It definitely piqued my interest into kind of going more into the cozy fantasy genre. And then our very last cozy fantasy is one that I also don't really know that I can consider specifically a cozy fantasy. I've been kind of considering them or like describing them as dark cozy fantasies, and that is Sunbringer by Hannah Kaner. This is the second book in a series. The first one was called God Killer, and it's basically about a group of people kind of going on their own journeys, stumbling upon each other, and then continuing their journey together. And again, I did kind of describe them as dark cozy fantasies because although it does have that found family vibe that gives it that cozy feel, it's very also not cozy because literally the last book, the first book in the series, God Killer, starts off with a god killing our main character, one of the main characters' entire family, like burning them alive. So Not the coziest. The next little grouping within fantasy is going to be fantasy slash like fantasy romance. And the reason I'm kind of clumping them together is because I just don't know which ones have romance and which ones don't. The majority of them, like probably 95% of them, definitely do have some sort of romance. But the first few, I think, don't have any romance, or if it does, it's not like the main reason for the story, if that makes sense. And I'm gonna warn you, this section is literally like the entirety of this top shelf and a little bit into this bottom one. So we've got a lot of fantasy romance. Can you tell it's my favorite genre? This is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I'm very excited to get into Brandon Sanderson. Haven't done it yet, but again, very excited to. The next one that we have is A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. This is a true story of a pioneering spirit who risked her reputation, her prospects, and her fragile flesh and bone to satisfy her scientific curiosity. I haven't honestly heard a ton of people talk about this one. I've literally only heard one person, but it was enough to make me want to check it out because it just seemed like an interesting and different kind of concept to anything else that I've really read. And also the cover of this is just really cool. So there's that one. Next up we have a duology, which I did actually start. I read the entirety of the first book, which is All of Us Villains. Unfortunately, by the time the second book came out, All of Our Demise, I completely forgot everything that happened in this book. I tried reading the second book and just was totally lost, so I'm gonna have to reread this to know what's going on in this book. Next up we have The Ones We Burn by Rebecca Mix. And this one is a book that I basically just picked up on a whim at Barnes & Noble. And then I think this is the last one that I have that I am not sure that a romance is involved. This is Masters of Death by Olivia Blake. I've heard a lot of really good things about Olivia Blake, and this is the book that I just thought the cover was cool, so I got it last October. Actually, that is definitely not the last one that may not have romance in it because there's quite a few more. Anyway, next up we have Her Radiant Curse by Elizabeth Lim. And I literally got this solely because the cover was really cool and it was 50% off at Barnes & Noble. I'm pretty sure at some point I have read the synopsis for this, but I don't remember anymore. And we don't have enough time for this video to be talking about every single synopsis, so we're gonna leave it at that. Next up I have The Sun and the Void by Gabriela Romero LaCruz, and I got this one also kind of near the end of last year because the cover just looked very Christmassy, like very seasonal to me. Obviously I never got around to reading it. This has illustrations in it as well, which I thought was really cool. Any kind of book with illustrations definitely pushes me to want to purchase that book even more because you actually get a real life visual of the characters. Next up we have a book that I just recently purchased. This is When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker, and I'm pretty sure from here on out these are the books that I think have some sort of romance involved in them, so fantasy romance up ahead. But this one, I don't remember exactly what it's about, but I've seen so many TikToks and reels and Instagram posts about people just absolutely loving this book, so very excited to get to this at some point. Next up we have Finale by Stephanie Garber. I just recently finished Caraval and Legendary, which are the first and second book in this series, and everything about these books feels like something I should really enjoy, but for some reason I was having a hard time kind of connecting to the stories, so maybe if I give myself a little bit of a break, I'll be able to enjoy this last one a little bit more. And next up I'm just gonna kind of like rapid fire show you a bunch of the fantasy romances that I have because one, I've probably already talked about them several different times, and then two, I don't want this video to be literally 10 hours long. So without further ado, continuing on with our fantasy romances, we have Sanctuary of the Shadow, and this one does not have his dust jacket just because I thought the hardcover looked really pretty. It's got like the elements on it, so excuse that, but there's that one. Then we have Fall of Wrath and Ruin, the One Dark Window duology, so One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns, Curious Tides, another duology I think. I don't know if there's going to be any more in this series, but we have House of Salt and Sorrow, and then House of Roots and Ruin. And then we have these three books, which are basically continuations from the Folk of the Air series. I always like forget what that series is called. Basically The Cruel Prince. But if you're familiar with that series, there is a spin-off series, and those books are called The Stolen Heir and The Prisoner's Throne. And then we have a little novella called How the King of Elfham Learned to Hate Stories. And this is essentially like a really pretty kind of like illustrated, again, novella about the Cruel Prince, essentially. So it's got a really pretty hardcover, really pretty end papers, and illustrations throughout the entire thing. So I got this one mostly just for the vibes. I'm obviously gonna read it, but I did get it mostly for, you know, collector's purposes. And speaking of collector's editions, I got this Red Queen special edition, which is just super beautiful. I've showed this so many times, so I'm not gonna talk any more about it, but she's so pretty. And then we have a couple of books in a series. I think this is actually supposed to eventually be a trilogy. This is A Serpent and the Wings of Night, and then The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. And then kind of like circling back to Caraval, we have the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. I have books 1 and books 3 in the UK covers, and then I recently purchased the US edition of the second book, purely for the fact that I could not get my hands on the second one of these ones, which was very, very sad. Next up, we have a little stack of books that I have literally recently purchased / just shown you guys. So again, we're gonna go through these very quickly. We've got The Veiled Kingdom, Three Dark Crowns, Half-Blood, and then Rhapsodic. Next up, we have another series, and I only have the second and third book in the series on my shelves because the first book is actually like wrapped up. Last December, I did a whole video where I wrapped up all the books that I purchased in 2022, so essentially my oldest books. So I actually have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 of those, and I'm gonna go to my Goodreads really quickly so I can kind of like brief over what those books are. Also, I've been really bad at actually unwrapping and reading those books. I kind of had the intent of wanting to finish those by this time this year, like read a couple every single month, and that never ended up happening. A Darker Shade of Magic is that first book in this series. That one's wrapped up, but we also have things like The London Seance Society, really good actually, If We Were Villains, In the Lives of Puppets, Clytemnestra, Ordinary Monsters. I think The Collected Regrets of Clover is in there, My Murder, Home After Dark by Riley Sager, The Only One Left by Riley Sager. There's also Death Comes to Marlowe. That is one that I bought in 2023, but I added it to that list because the first book I liked, but I didn't enjoy it enough to like want to reach for the second one. So I wrapped it up so that I would kind of, again, like force myself to read it. I don't think I said 14 books, so I don't know what else is over there, but according to my Goodreads list, that's the only thing that I know that is over there. So that'll be a mystery at some point, but we do have 14 books over there. Next up, we have another really pretty book that I've shown you so many times because specifically it is so pretty, and that is this really cool edition of Circe. This is a UK hardcover edition, and in case you missed the other like 10 times that I've shown this, here's what the hardcover looks like. Next up, we have House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. This is like a special indie release edition of this. My friend went to a like release party for this book, and she ended up getting 2 of the books, so she sent me one of them, and I am in love with this book. It's so pretty. This is the third book in the Crescent City series, and I do actually still need to read the first and second one as well. Actually, they're in these little piles over here, so let me just show them to you really quickly. We have the first, I believe, and second book, so I still need to read all 3 of these as well. And then last but not least, for our first shelf, we have another series. This is, I think, a full trilogy, but it's like one series among many within the same universe. This is by Cassandra Clare. We have Chain of Gold, Chain of Iron, and then Chain of Thorns. Basically, I got this series because this book in particular, the third one, was also in that 50% off sale that I was talking about earlier. And I got it without realizing that it was the third book in a series. So very quickly, I realized I had to get the other 2, which are, again, these ones. But then after I got these 2, a few of you actually let me know that if I was going to get into this universe, there was actually another series that I should read before this set. Now let's go ahead and move on to our bottom shelf, our second shelf. And although we are moving on to a new shelf, we are still very much in the fantasy romance realm, but I do think we're starting to wrap it up. And the last few that I have, they're still like fantasy romance, but I think they're more so like spicy fantasy romances. That is not to say that there isn't spice in any of the other ones that I talked about. I just don't know for sure. Whereas these ones, I know for sure that they do have some sort of spice. Actually, except for this first one. This one I'm just kind of putting in this section, honestly, because it just looks like it's going to be a spicy fantasy romance. This one is called Gothicana by Runix. It does say a tale of dark romance, and typically dark romances definitely have spice in them. And this one I think is like an age gap between a student and a professor at a like mysterious university that happens to be in a castle or something like that. Like, it has a really cool vibe. Next up, we have another series that I purchased so long ago. I've talked about this so many times, specifically about how I bought this a long time ago and still have not read it, and that is Guild by Raven Kennedy, and this is the first book in the Plated Prisoner series, so 5 more books to add to our ginormous physical TBR. Next up, another series that I started a while ago and need to finish. That is A Touch of Chaos by Scarlett St. Clair. This is the last and final book in the Touch of Darkness or Hades x Persephone series. Basically, we have 2 sets of trilogies that are the same exact story, but from different perspectives. We have Persephone's perspective and then Hades' perspective. I read the entirety of the Touch of Darkness trilogy, but I've only read the first book in the Hades spin-off trilogy. So I've got like 3 more books in this series to read. And with that book, that is the very last fantasy related book that we have. So let's go ahead and move on to romance, which is pretty much my second favorite genre. And we're kicking it off with a spicy one. This is King of Wrath by Anna Wong. I've never read a book by her, but I've heard a lot of really good things about her writing. So I'm excited to give this series a chance. And I'm not gonna lie, the main reason I picked up this book was because it does say the King of Wrath. And if you've been following me for a while, you know I'm obsessed with Kingdom of the Wicked, which has a theming of the princes of hell who embody the 7 deadly sins, and that is like my favorite concept ever. This is not fantasy whatsoever. This is literally a billionaire romance, so it has nothing to do with like princes of hell or anything like that, but I'm excited about the incorporation of the 7 deadly sins into romance novels. So there's that. And the majority of the rest of the books that I have in this genre are all books that I have also shown more recently and also just like super popular that everyone knows about. So I'm going to, again, very quickly, just rapid fire go through them. First up, we have Daisy Hates, which is the second book in the Magnolia Parks universe. I read the first book in that series a long time ago, and I just recently got the most recent one, so I'm kind of intrigued to start this back up again soon. Then we have A Novel Love Story, which is one of my most highly anticipated for this entire year, so I'm very excited to be getting to this one. I'm definitely gonna read this like ASAP. Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. The Fine Print by Lauren Asher. I've never read anything by her, but a lot of people really love her, so I'm very excited to give her writing a shot. And speaking of Lauren Asher, we also have Love Redesigned. And then we have a couple of books from a couple of my favorite romance writers. We have Wild Love by Elsie Silver, and then Happily Never After by Lynn Painter. And then we have a couple of cowboy romances, which are like my new romance subgenre obsession, and that is Done and Dusted by Lila Sage, and then we have Dust Storm by Maggie Gates. And then last but not least, for our romance genre, we have a book that I got at like a secondhand store like a long time ago. This is Starcrust by Minnie Dark. Basically, it's a romance kind of involving zodiac signs, which I'm a big believer in, so I'm very excited to read this at some point. The next genre that we have is kind of more of a broad one. I'm basically just doing like fiction / contemporary fiction. I don't really know what these books are. They're just fiction books. I don't really gravitate toward books in this genre very often. I'm gonna go ahead and predict that the majority of these books are probably gonna be on this TBR for quite some time, but you never really know. Actually, before we get started with that, I have one more cozy fantasy that was hiding amongst these books. This is A Far Wilder Magic by Allison Saft. Now again, this is kind of our fiction section. First up, we have the couple that I am actually really excited for. So this is Under the Influence by Noelle Crooks. First of all, the cover of this, so cute. The covers of most like contemporary fiction / like literary fiction books are always my favorite, but I typically tend to not like those types of books. So I have high hopes for this, but also I'm a little afraid. But there's a quote at the top of this one that says it kind of resembles The Devil Wears Prada, and that is like one of my favorite movies. So I'm very excited about this one. This is, as the title suggests, about someone that like wants to be an influencer, or it's about the assistant to an influencer or something like that. And then this one is actually on my TBR for this month specifically, and I know for sure I'm gonna read it because I am so excited for it. This is I Hope This Finds You Well, and this one was also compared to one of my favorite TV shows, The Office. I've literally watched every single one of those episodes like 5 times. I am obsessed with that show. So I'm very excited about this. It does definitely seem like it's gonna have kind of like a dry, sarcastic-y type of humor to it, which I absolutely love. Next up, we actually have a couple that I don't know if they fit this genre very well. The first one that we have is The Girls I've Been, and this one is basically about the antics of a con artist's daughter. And then the other one is Killers of a Certain Age. I feel like this one might be considered a thriller. It's basically about a group of women who are getting too old, so they're retiring from being assassins, and then they get like a hit put on them. So I think this might be a thriller, but also, I'm gonna be honest, I got this because it was like a book of the month book, but I don't know if I really care to read this. Next up is one that I'm actually really excited for. This is another one that one of my friends got me. This is The Accidental Medium, and if I remember the synopsis correctly, I think this one is about a woman who pretends to be a medium but then turns out to actually be a medium. I absolutely love the idea of stuff like this, so very excited for this one. Also, this one has a really cool cover as well. And then next up, speaking of covers, this next book I purely bought because of that. I had absolutely no interest in ever reading another book by this author, but this cover just like, I had to have it, and that is Rouge by Mona Awad. I read Bunny by this author and absolutely hated it. So again, I didn't think I was ever gonna get another Mona Awad book, but this cover just like really drew me in. This one is basically about like a cultish kind of skincare brand or something like that, and somebody that's just like super obsessed with skincare, and I'm kind of getting to that stage in my life where I'm like super obsessed with skincare, so I think this could be an interesting read, hopefully. And then the last 3 books that I have are other ones that I've gotten, but I just don't know. Again, this is not like the genre that I typically reach for, so I just feel like these are going to be on my shelf for a long time. I kind of have similar feelings to them as I do for Killers of a Certain Age. Like, the concepts sound like they could be fun, but at the same time, it's just never something that I'm like presently wanting to read, if that makes any sense whatsoever. The first one that we have is The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. This one does have kind of like a cool, fun kind of like Willy Wonka-esque type concept, but involving books instead of like a candy factory. So that definitely does pique my interest. But again, just not enough to where I've picked it up yet. And then we have Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Gramis. This one is kind of like a historical fiction, and those types of books really don't appeal to me very often, although I will say the couple that I have read I did really enjoy. So I'm sure I'm gonna love this. Like, I've heard a lot of really good things, and I actually showed this at some point on my Instagram, and my cousin like DM'd me and was like, oh my god, that book is so good. So I'm sure this is a really good book. I never care to reach for it. And then last but not least, for this genre, we have The Husbands. And this one actually does have a cool sounding concept. This one also might be kind of thriller territory. There's actually a quote that says, a thrillingly original debut. It says, Michael goes to the attic to change a light bulb and abruptly disappears. In his place, a new man emerges and a new slightly altered life reforms around her. So her husband keeps like changing, and then therefore her life keeps slightly changing. And that definitely sounds like a very appealing concept. But again, I don't know why, but like, if it ain't fantasy and romance, I just don't grab for it. And speaking of genres that I don't really reach for very often, I've got two separate genres included in this little stack. And the first one is classics. And literally the only classic that I own is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I personally have very little interest in reading classics, but basically I bought this because it is a special like illustrated edition of this book. So as you can see, we've got some artwork on the cover, and we also have some illustrated end papers, but then there is also some illustrations like sprinkled in throughout the rest of the book as well. So I think that'll make the reading process for this more fun. I've kind of decided that if I do read a classic, I want to get like a special illustrated edition, because I feel like that'll make, again, the reading process more fun. I feel like a child saying things like that, but whatever. I need my classics to have pictures for me to read them. The next book that I have, I feel like is a good kind of transition book between my kind of like classics genre section and my poetry section. This is Dante's Inferno, and again, this is a special edition. This was published in 1320. I did not know it was that old. That is kind of crazy. Next up, we have our little poetry collection, and I got these all last year with the intent of kind of getting more into poetry this year. So far, I have not picked up a single one of these. Quick fire, kind of going through these books, we have Sweet Dark by Savannah Brown, The Girl Aquarium by Jen Campbell, and this is actually a fellow booktuber. And then we have Oil Spill by Dylan Saucedo, and this one I have actually kind of flipped through a little bit. And from the couple of poems that I have read, I definitely think this is going to be a book that I like. Also, this one includes a lot of illustrations in it, which is another thing that I really enjoy in poetry books specifically. I like having a visual with the poem. And then second to last, we have Life of the Party by Olivia Gatwood. And this one is basically a collection of poems about being a girl and being a woman and things like that. And then last but not least, this one is one that originally drew me in, to no one's surprise, by the cover. But I did actually look up a couple of the poems on Amazon to like see if it's something that I liked before I purchased it. This one is Playing with Matches by Michael Faudet. And this one also has some imagery, but it's not like illustrations, it's actual like pictures that the author took himself. I also think that is going to be a really cool reading experience as well. Now let's get into all of our thrillers and horror books. To put into perspective of how many books I have on my physical TBR, I've literally run out of space, so I've had to put some books on here. So let's go through these ones. Like I said, these are all my horror and thriller books, and I did kind of separate these. So these are thrillers, these are horror. And we're gonna go ahead and start off with our thrillers because they're closer to me. Actually, we have two other genres before we get into the thrillers and the horror. I totally forgot. This is a small little pile of nonfiction books, and this is a small little pile of short story books. So let's go ahead and go through these first, which, to be fair, the majority of these are also horror, but I kind of separated them because I have one book in particular that is not. Anyway, first book that we have is The Gathering Dark, and this is an anthology of folk horror. I have read the first short story in this book like last October, and it was way creepier than I thought it was going to be because it is in the young adult section, and yeah, not many things creep me out when I'm reading them, but this creeped me out. So I'm excited to read the rest of them. And then we have Never Whistle at Night, and this is an Indigenous dark fiction anthology, and I think the cover of this is so freaking fun. I got this last year to read in October, and I just never got around to it, so definitely gonna be reading it this year, along with Tiny Nightmares, and this is very short tales of horror. And then we do have one more short story book, but it isn't horror. This one is Shit Cassandra Saw. There was specifically a sentence in this one that like made me want to get this. Virgins escape from being sacrificed, witches refuse to be burned, whores aren't ashamed, and every woman gets a chance to be a radioactive cockroach warrior who snaps back at catcallers. So this is basically like girl power fiction short stories, and I hope this is going to be a lot of fun. Now let's get into our small little collection of non-fiction books, which I made it a goal of mine to read 5 nonfiction books this year, and so far I have gotten this far into 1. So I don't think I'm gonna hit this goal. I might change it to like 3 to make it a little bit more attainable, but we'll see how it goes. This is What I Was Doing While You Were Breeding by Kristen Newman, and this is basically kind of like a memoir of her travels and things like that. Essentially what she was doing with her life aside from like getting married and having kids, doing the traditional kind of life. I was supposed to have finished that book last month, and I had planned to read like 10 pages a day, and that just never happened. I think I did it for like 2 or 3 days and then stopped. Next up we have Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory. I've talked about this book several different times, and I did start it last October and never got around to finishing it. So I definitely want to finish it this year. It has actually been really, really interesting. It's basically about somebody that works at a crematory and kind of just like stories that have happened to her. From the same author, we have Traveling the World to Find the Good Death from Here to Eternity. Author of these, by the way, is Caitlin Daughtry, and she is like an actual mortician. So this one is kind of like stories from her on the job, and this one is more so stories that she's learned about death from different cultures while she's traveling, and the concept of that just sounds really intriguing to me. And then last but not least, for our nonfictions, we have Having and Being Had by Eula Biss. I don't know if I'm saying that name correctly, but this is another one that I thought the cover was really, really cool. But the concept of this also sounds interesting. Through a series of engaging exchanges in libraries and laundromats, on bar stools, and over backyard fences, she examines the complexity and contradictions of middle-class ethics. The result is an uncommonly immersive and deeply revealing new portrait of work and luxury, of accumulation and consumption, of the value of time and how we spend it. So it's basically about our spending habits and things. As someone that is a big consumer of stuff, obviously I buy a lot of books and things like that, but also as someone that does a lot of thrifting, I think this will be a really fun read, or an interesting read. I don't know if it'll be fun, but it'll be interesting. Now let's officially get into our thrillers and our horror, and I think I'm gonna go ahead and start with thrillers, which I believe I kind of kept to this side, and I feel like I've been talking for so long, so we're gonna try to rapid fire this as well. The Word is Murder, Survive the Night, Lies Like Wildfire, Every Last Secret, The House Across the Lake, The Book of Lost Things, which this one actually has kind of elements of fantasy to it as well, which I'm very intrigued by. And then this last one on this shelf, we have The Witches of New York. This one I don't actually think is a thriller. I think this should have been in with like the contemporary fiction. And then in our bottom shelf for the thrillers, we have Plain Bad Heroines, and this one's more of kind of like a dark academia thriller. Next up, we have my newest thriller purchase, which is The Midnight Feast by Lucy Foley. I am very, very excited to get to this one. And then we have Murder Your Employer, and then Scorched Grace. And now, last but not least, we have my horror books, which I'm actually really surprised to see that I have more of than thrillers. Again, kind of quick fire. How to Be Eaten, Darkroom Etiquette, We Sold Our Souls by Grady Hendrix, who is like one of my favorite horror writers. I am very, 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 very new to horror, but I've read a few of his books and I've really liked all of them. Just Like Home, Slewfoot. This one is Don't Let It In by Brandon Faircloth, and this is actually another horror short story collection. I don't know why, but apparently I'm really interested in short stories when it comes to horror. And then last but not least, for this bottom part of the horror section, we have Mary, An Awakening of Terror by Nat Cassidy. I got this with the intent of reading it last Halloween and I never did, so I'm definitely gonna do it this year. And now we finally have our last couple of stacks for this entire video. We have What Big Teeth, Hell House by Richard Matheson, and The Deep by Nick Cutter. I read one of Nick Cutter's books last year and really enjoyed it. And then last but not least, our last few are all kind of more in the slasher realm. So we have Clown in a Cornfield, Taste Like Candy, Them, which is about aliens. Very, very intrigued by this. Cirque Berserk. And then last but not least, for this entire video, we have The Cotton Candy Massacre. So when it comes to slashers, clowns are definitely a big theme. Random fun fact about me, I also don't really like clowns. I don't like the idea of like not knowing who is in that costume. Anyway, with that is everything that I have for this video. That is my entire TBR. I don't know as of right now how many, but as I'm editing this video, I am gonna like have like a counter in the corner. So you know that we have this many books on our TBR. Crazy, crazy amount of books. I definitely need to start reading them quicker than I'm buying them. I mean, I'm literally stacking books underneath my bookcase because I don't have enough space for them. So it's a problem. Let me know in the comments how many books you have on your physical TBR. Are you drowning in your books with me, or are you a lot better at reading as you buy them?